Beethoven.
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 Ludwig van Beethoven. Have you heard of him? Maybe you have, but I'm sure you have heard his music. Beethoven wrote that. He is a composer. A composer, as you probably know, is someone who writes music, like an author writes the words of a story. Just as there are symbols, letters, that stand for words, there are also symbols that stand for pitches or notes. And not only notes, but how long to play the note, how loud, how fast, by which instrument, and so on.
Here's an example of written music. Pretty messy, huh? Those were just some of Beethoven's ideas quickly scribbled down for some music he was thinking about. I want you to stop for a moment and think about music. Don't make any sound, but just think. Perhaps it's a song you have heard, or maybe a song you would make up if you were a composer. Or maybe it's not a song at all, but just a bunch of sounds. Try it. Be quiet and listen inside your imagination.
Could you hear it? Maybe you heard some music you listened to this morning. Did it feel a little different for you to stop and just imagine a song without any words at all? This is what composers do. They come up with sounds that, when you put them all together, create a new song that no one has ever heard before.
Fortunately for us, we get to hear some of the sounds that Beethoven imagined and wrote down a long time ago. Ludwig van Beethoven was born in Germany over 200 years ago. At that time, here in America, the United States was just getting off the ground. The fact that we're still playing Beethoven's music today shows us how great a composer he was. He wrote all kinds of music, songs for his friends to sing, music to play at home on the piano, for church services and government ceremonies, for operas, which are like musicals, music to dance to, music for small groups of instruments, and music for large groups of instruments called orchestras.
Today we're going to hear parts of his symphonies. What's a symphony? A symphony is a piece of music written for orchestra, and an orchestra is usually made up of many instruments, especially string instruments, woodwind instruments, brass instruments, and even percussion instruments. Now, we couldn't cram a whole orchestra into the room you're in, but we have part of an orchestra here today to play for you. We play brass instruments. And since there are 5 of us, we are called a brass quintet, playing 4 different instruments that represent each of the parts of the brass section of the orchestra: trumpet, horn, trombone, and tuba.
Now back to Beethoven's symphonies. He wrote 9 of them. Now, if you were to listen to all 9 symphonies, it would take you about 6 hours. That's a long time. So we're just going to share little pieces from Beethoven's odd symphonies.
Wait a second, odd symphonies? What makes them so odd?
Oh, well, it's not that they are odd, it's just that they're odd numbered. You know, like 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, and so on. These are some of his most famous ones, so we thought it would be fun to listen to those. Just like the episodes of Star Wars are given numbers, symphonies are numbered too. In fact, they are sometimes given nicknames as well. Take the 3rd Symphony, for example. We'll listen to this one first. Beethoven wrote it to pay tribute to Napoleon, the leader of France. However, before the piece was finished, Beethoven realized that Napoleon was not someone to be admired. His hero was not a hero at all. But we still call this symphony the heroic symphony. Here's what the tune in the first movement sounds like. One thing that we didn't tell you about a symphony is that it usually comes in movements. Just like a book comes with several chapters, a symphony often has 4 parts that tell the story. The first one is usually upbeat, and then slows down for the second movement. Here's the second movement of Beethoven's Third Symphony. That was pretty dark, like a slow, sad march. The third movement of a symphony is often a bit happier, even dance-like. Listen to this. Now that brings us to the fourth and final movement of Beethoven's Third Symphony. Like most symphonies, it is the finale, the big ending. This one does have a big ending, but we want to play the part that shows how creative Beethoven was. He uses short, little sounds to create a melody. Kind of like a painting that when you look up really closely, it's just made up of dots of color. Listen.
As much fun as it is to listen to, it's a whole lot of fun to play. We wish we could play the whole thing for you, but we just don't have time. So let's move on to one of Beethoven's most famous pieces. Are you ready? Hold on tight. Wow, that's a pretty dramatic start to a big piece of music. And remember, that's just the first of the 4 chapters or movements. But I thought Brian said that symphonies usually start upbeat. Well, they usually do, but that's why Beethoven was such a brilliant composer. He wasn't content to just compose nice music like those who came before him. He wanted to express something more. Here is where he goes with the 2nd and 3rd movements of the 5th Symphony. So you're probably starting to realize now that Beethoven wrote all kinds of different melodies. Here's how the symphony ends. It's a pretty happy, triumphant ending after all of the drama of his 5th Symphony.
So what was Beethoven trying to express? It's a great question that so many people have been trying to answer for years. We know one big thing that made Beethoven's life difficult. He was going deaf. Can you imagine? A composer who loves to write music for others to hear, but he's gradually losing the ability to hear his own music. He wrote this in a letter to a friend. I must confess that I'm living a miserable life. For almost 2 years, I've ceased to attend any social functions just because I find it impossible to say to people, I am deaf. If I had any other profession, it would be easier, but in my profession, it is a terrible handicap. Still, Beethoven kept composing music. Since symphonies are pretty long pieces of music for many instruments, it makes sense that there are many different melodies heard throughout the different movements. We're going to give you a quick tour of Beethoven's 7th Symphony. Remember, these are just little snippets of a much bigger story that you would hear if you listened to the whole thing.
There were other things that made life difficult for Beethoven. To begin with, he had no steady source of income. He composed lots of music, but didn't really work for one person or organization. On top of this, we know that Beethoven fell in love over and over again, but the objects of his affection all turned him away. He longed to marry and have a family. To add to this, his former hero, Napoleon, was causing wars all around Europe. Would he end up deaf, poor, and alone? In his worst moments, Beethoven could not shake these fears. He seemed unable to grab hold of what he thought would make him ultimately happy.
Yet he kept composing music, and he actually became quite famous and wealthy because of it, for a short time. The fame didn't last, but his deafness did. By the age of 28, Beethoven was completely deaf. He had others write things down in order to communicate. He became reclusive and bitter. It was 1823, and Beethoven hadn't written a symphony in 10 years. But he long had the idea to write something grand with the words of a poem titled Ode to Joy. For a guy who had been depressed for so long, it seems odd that he wrote a piece on such an uplifting topic, joy. And what's even stranger is that he used a symphony to carry the words. If you have been paying attention, symphonies don't have words, just instruments playing notes. However, he had a wonderful idea to add a choir to this symphony. After all, our voices are instruments too. The text calls all creatures to be joyful. Here are melodies from the first 3 movements of Beethoven's 9th Symphony. And now, the part that is still so popular and well known today. It went with the words of that poem, Ode to Joy. After sitting silent for the first 3 movements, the choirs stand to sing in triumph. It is a powerful melody that has been sung to celebrate many big, joyful events. In fact, when the Berlin Wall fell and Germany became unified once again, they sang the word freedom instead of joy. Here's a part of Beethoven's Final Symphony.
Remember how we talked about hearing music in our heads? We think that Beethoven heard music in his head so well that he didn't need to hear what it sounded like to his ears. Maybe this even helped him come up with new ideas that were too strange to others' ears. In any case, Beethoven pressed on to create, to tell his story. What do you do that's part of your unique story? Maybe it is the schoolwork that you persevere in because you love to learn. Maybe it's a musical instrument that you practice diligently every day. Maybe it's a sport that you love to play and want to get better at. We hope you will listen some more to Beethoven's music. The ups and downs in the music are so much like each of our lives. He triumphed because he kept composing. Even though he couldn't hear it, even when he was alive, his music continues to be heard by those all over the world for centuries. Thanks for allowing us to share some of our music. I'm Brian, and I played the trumpet.
I'm Mike, and I play the trumpet.
I'm Dan, and I play the French horn.
I'm Chelsea, and I played the trombone.
I'm Sean, and I play the tuba.
We are the musicians of the International Chamber Artists. Look us up at www.icamusic.org or on our Facebook page. We'd love to hear what you think. And special thanks to the Paul M. Angel Foundation for sponsoring these performances. We look forward to getting together, hopefully in person next time, to share more of the music that we all love.